Your soulmate is about to send you this tonight. I can't lose you twice. My beloved child. Tonight, your soulmate may finally send the message they have written, erased, and rewritten more times than they would ever admit. But there is one sentence they cannot bring themselves to delete: I can't lose you twice. Those words carry a history you may not fully understand yet, because the first time they believe they lost you was not when the silence began. It happened earlier, during a moment you probably thought meant nothing. They watched you pull back emotionally, felt something change in the way you responded, and suddenly realized they had waited too long to say what was inside them. Since then, they have been carrying one frightening question: what if you have already learned how to live without them? Don't skip, because what they are preparing to send tonight is not simply an apology. There is something inside that message they have never admitted to you before. For days, they have been looking for a sign that reaching out would not make everything worse. They have opened your old conversations. They have remembered little details you probably assumed they forgot. A phrase you used. A moment when you gave them another chance without calling it one. Even the last conversation where they wanted to say more but chose silence instead. And that silence has been haunting them. Tonight feels different because something happened that made waiting suddenly feel more dangerous than rejection. They heard something, saw something, or experienced a moment that forced them to imagine you moving forward permanently. That possibility shook them. So they began typing. At first, the message was careful and controlled. Then it became painfully honest. They admitted they were afraid. They admitted pride kept them quiet. But just before pressing send, they added a sentence that changes the meaning of everything, and it explains why they keep saying they cannot lose you twice. The first loss, you see, may never have been a physical separation. It was the moment they realized they had damaged the version of you that once trusted them completely. They noticed your energy become guarded. They felt you stop reaching toward them in the same effortless way. And although they pretended not to notice, they knew exactly why. That is what they consider losing you the first time. Now they fear a second loss would be permanent. Not losing your attention, but losing the possibility of ever rebuilding what existed between you. Their finger keeps hovering over the send button because the message contains a confession that could either reopen the door or close it forever. Stay till the end, because hidden beneath the apology is the real reason they pulled away when they wanted to come closer, and tonight, they may finally tell you exactly what they were protecting you from. What they were protecting you from was not another person, and that is where the truth becomes harder to ignore. Your soulmate had convinced themselves that getting closer to you would eventually expose something they were deeply ashamed of. The fear that they could never become the person you deserved. So instead of admitting that fear, they created distance. They answered differently. They became harder to read. At times, they may even have made you believe they cared less than they actually did. But tonight, they finally understand what that strategy cost them. The message on their screen now contains words they once promised themselves they would never say. I pushed you away because losing you later terrified me more than hurting myself now. Yet there is another line beneath it they still haven't decided whether to send, because that line reveals what happened during the silence. During that silence, they tried to convince themselves they could move forward. They filled their days, distracted their mind, and acted as though the connection had become something they could simply place in the past. But ordinary moments kept bringing you back. A familiar phrase. A place connected to a memory. A quiet night when there was nobody around to perform strength for. And then something happened recently that shattered the illusion completely. They came across an old conversation between you, one they had avoided rereading because they knew exactly what it contained. Buried inside was a message from you that suddenly looked completely different with time. You had given them an opening. A small one, but unmistakable. You had practically invited them to tell the truth, and they had answered with distance instead. That realization hit them harder than expected. You had not abandoned them then. They had let the opportunity disappear. Now tonight has become their attempt to stop history from repeating itself. They are no longer asking whether sending the message will make them look vulnerable. They are asking whether staying silent will cost them you permanently. And there is one detail making that fear even stronger. Something has convinced them that your life may be changing faster than they expected. They sense you are no longer standing emotionally where they left you. That is why the draft has grown from a few careful sentences into something almost impossible for them to hide behind. They want to explain the distance, admit what they misunderstood, and finally tell you why they never truly stopped thinking about that missed opportunity. But before sending it, they added one final confession after the words, "I can't lose you twice." And if they leave that confession in the message, you may finally discover what they secretly decided about you long before this night arrived. That secret decision was made during one of the quietest nights of their life, when nobody knew they were still thinking about you. They told themselves that if another genuine chance ever appeared, they would not hide behind fear again. They would speak clearly, even if the answer frightened them. But when opportunities came, courage disappeared. Every time they considered contacting you, another thought stopped them. What if you had already closed that door? What if their message interrupted the peace you had finally found? So they waited, hoping for certainty that never came. Tonight, however, they have realized certainty was never the requirement. Courage was. And buried near the bottom of their draft is the promise they made in private. If there is even a small part of you that still remembers what we had, I'm willing to rebuild this differently. But something happened before they finished typing that made the message suddenly feel urgent. They noticed something that suggested you may truly be moving beyond the chapter they thought would remain unfinished forever. Maybe it was a change in your behavior, your silence becoming calmer, or simply the realization that you no longer seem to be waiting for explanations. Whatever triggered it, they felt the difference immediately. For the first time, your soulmate understood that losing someone does not always happen through one dramatic goodbye. Sometimes it happens quietly, when the other person stops asking questions and starts accepting the absence. That thought frightened them more than rejection. So they returned to the message and removed every safe, meaningless sentence. No pretending. No vague excuses. They began replacing them with specific truths, including an admission about the exact moment they realized their feelings for you had become impossible to dismiss. It happened after a conversation they once treated casually. You said something simple about wanting honesty instead of perfection, and although they barely reacted at the time, those words stayed with them. Later, alone, they realized you had never been demanding the flawless version of them they were desperately trying to become. You had been asking for the real one. That realization is why tonight's message keeps changing. They are no longer trying to impress you, they are trying to finally let you see what fear kept hidden. And now there is only one sentence they cannot decide whether to include, because it goes beyond regret and reveals what they actually want from you next. They have typed it. Deleted it. Typed it again. Their hand keeps returning to the same words, and if those words reach your screen tonight, you will understand why "I can't lose you twice" was only the beginning of what they needed to confess. The sentence they keep returning to is painfully simple: "I don't want another temporary moment with you. I want the chance to do this right." That is what scares them most, because saying it removes every hiding place they once depended on. They cannot blame timing anymore. They cannot pretend their feelings are uncertain. And they cannot send those words without accepting that you may ask the question they have been avoiding: why did it take losing my trust for you to finally become honest? Your soulmate knows you deserve that answer. So beneath that sentence, they begin explaining the part of the story they never allowed you to see. The private battle that started whenever the connection between you became serious enough to feel permanent. The closer they felt to you, the more they feared disappointing you. Strange, isn't it? You may have interpreted their distance as indifference, while they were secretly overwhelmed by how much your opinion mattered. One misunderstood conversation became another. One delayed response created another layer of uncertainty. Eventually, both of you were reacting to things neither of you had actually said aloud. But tonight, your soulmate sees the pattern clearly. They realize they kept waiting for you to prove it was safe to be vulnerable while giving you almost no reason to feel safe with them. That realization changes the entire message. They add an apology, not the easy kind that asks you to forget everything, but one that acknowledges they cannot demand the same version of you back. Something has changed inside you, and they know they must meet you where you are now. Then comes the most unexpected part. They are not planning to ask you for an immediate answer. In fact, the final lines say something closer to, "You don't owe me a response tonight. I just couldn't let another night pass while you believed my silence meant I didn't care." But their message still contains one unanswered mystery. Why tonight? Why, after all this hesitation, does this particular night feel like their last chance? There is a reason they haven't mentioned yet, and it has nothing to do with desperation or drama. They recently learned something that changed their understanding of your last meaningful interaction. A detail they completely misunderstood at the time has finally been explained to them. And once they discovered what you were actually trying to tell them that day, they realized their silence may have broken something you were still hoping they would save. The detail they misunderstood was hidden inside something you said so casually that they never recognized it as an invitation. You weren't asking them to make some enormous promise. You were giving them a chance to be honest about whether this connection mattered. But your soulmate heard uncertainty where there was actually vulnerability. They thought you were preparing to walk away, so they protected themselves by becoming distant first. Only recently did they replay that conversation without fear controlling the meaning, and suddenly everything sounded different. Your pauses made sense. Your careful words made sense. Even the question you asked before the conversation ended carried a meaning they completely missed. You weren't closing the door. You were waiting to see whether they would finally step through it. And now they cannot stop wondering how different everything might have been if they had answered you honestly. That realization is why tonight feels like their last chance. Not because some clock is literally counting down, but because they can feel the emotional distance becoming real. They sense that you are no longer searching for explanations the way you once did. You may still care, but caring and waiting are two different things, and your soulmate is finally beginning to understand that. So they open the draft again and add something more vulnerable. I know I can't ask you to return to where we were. I only want you to know I finally understand what you were trying to give me. Then they stop. Because those words force them to confront another uncomfortable truth. If they want another opportunity, they cannot simply confess their feelings. They must tell you what would actually be different this time, and that answer requires a promise they are afraid to make unless they genuinely intend to keep it. So they begin writing what they would change. No disappearing when conversations become difficult. No expecting you to guess what they are feeling. No creating distance just to see whether you will chase them. They want honesty to replace the confusing silence that damaged the connection before. But then their message takes an unexpected turn. Instead of promising perfection, they admit something far more believable. They may still become afraid, but this time they want to tell you when they are afraid instead of pushing you away. That single admission makes the entire message feel real to them. Their finger moves toward send, and then stops again when they remember one final thing they have never told you. There was a specific moment after the two of you grew distant when they almost reached out. Something happened that night that stopped them, and discovering why may completely change what you thought their silence meant. That night, your soulmate had already written the message. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. They had finally admitted they missed you, regretted the distance, and wanted to know whether there was still something worth saving. Then, just before sending it, they saw something that made them believe you had already moved on emotionally. They didn't investigate. They didn't ask you. They simply accepted their worst fear as truth and deleted everything. What they never understood was that the thing they saw had nothing to do with replacing them. Their fear filled in the missing pieces, and once again, silence made the decision for them. Now they recognize the painful pattern. Every time their heart wanted to move toward you, fear created a story convincing them to retreat. Tonight, they refuse to repeat it. They have stopped looking for proof that you will respond exactly the way they hope. Instead, they are preparing themselves for whatever truth comes back. That is a major change, because previously they wanted reassurance before offering vulnerability. Now they understand vulnerability comes first. Their draft says, "Maybe I misunderstood more than I realized. Maybe I was so afraid of hearing goodbye that I never gave you the chance to say anything else." Then comes another confession. They admit there were moments when they almost contacted you simply because something wonderful happened and you were still the first person they wanted to tell. That frightened them. Time had passed, distance had grown, yet somehow their instinct still led back to you. But the strongest line is still waiting beneath everything else. They haven't deleted it because it explains what twice truly means to them now. The first time, they lost the closeness you shared. The second time, they fear losing the future possibility they kept secretly protecting even while pretending they had accepted the distance. And tonight, they are finally willing to risk hearing your answer rather than spending another month wondering what might have happened. Their message is almost ready. Only one final paragraph remains unfinished, and they know those last words will determine whether this is merely a confession or an actual invitation back into their life. They have started that paragraph with a question meant only for you, and it is the one question they have been terrified to ask since everything changed. The question they finally type is this: if I had been honest with you then, would you have stayed? They stare at those words because your answer matters more than they want to admit. For months, they assumed the opportunity had disappeared because your feelings changed. Now they are beginning to suspect something far more painful, that the connection may have fallen apart because both of you were waiting for clarity at the same time. You were waiting for them to show you what you meant to them, while they were waiting for reassurance before taking the risk. Nobody moved. Silence grew. And eventually, that silence began looking like an answer. But tonight, your soulmate wants to challenge that old conclusion. They add another sentence: maybe I can't change what happened, but I don't want fear deciding what happens next. Then they pause, because another memory suddenly comes rushing back. It is a memory of the last time they felt completely certain that you cared. Nothing dramatic happened. There was simply a moment when you noticed something about them that everyone else overlooked. You remembered a detail they had mentioned long before, and your soulmate realized you had been listening more closely than they knew. They never told you how deeply that affected them. Instead, they carried the memory privately, returning to it whenever they tried convincing themselves the connection had meant nothing. Don't skip, because this is where tonight's message becomes more than an apology. They begin admitting the small things they remember about you too, the way your tone changed when something bothered you, the things that made you laugh, the moments when you tried to appear strong even when they could sense something underneath. They want you to understand that their silence never erased their attention. Then they reach the final lines, but something unexpected happens. Instead of asking you to come back, they decide to give you a choice without pressure. If that door is closed, I will respect it. But if it isn't completely closed, I don't want to waste another chance pretending this doesn't matter. For the first time, the message feels finished. Their heart is racing because there are no excuses left between you and the truth. They read everything once. Twice. Then their eyes stop on the sentence that started all of this: I can't lose you twice. Their finger moves toward send, but before touching it, they add 6 words beneath that sentence. 6 words they had been too afraid to admit even to themselves, because those words reveal exactly what they have secretly wanted from you all along. Those 6 words are: I still want a future together. The moment they type them, everything becomes more serious. This is no longer a message written simply to ease regret or clear their conscience. They are admitting that somewhere beneath the distance, they never completely stopped imagining what could happen if the two of you found your way back to honest communication. But they know those words could sound too easy after everything that happened, so they refuse to leave them unexplained. They add that they are not asking you to forget the confusion or pretend the silence never hurt. They want to start with one conversation. One honest exchange without games, assumptions, or disappearing when emotions become uncomfortable. And strangely, asking for something that simple makes them more nervous than making a dramatic promise ever could. Because now they understand what rebuilding would actually require. It would mean listening when the truth is difficult. It would mean answering questions they once avoided. Most importantly, it would mean accepting that you may not trust their words immediately. Your soulmate realizes trust, Kano.